my most recent blog post, not only do I have an explanation that really is tailored to anyone and understanding what are the real world use cases of agents today. So they're really good at answering questions. But the change now is that not only can it answer questions, but now with things like MCP, which is a standardized protocol that Anthropic put out, developers can build tools that these chatbots can reference. So it goes from not just having information and knowing how to give you the answer that you want. Also, it goes to being able to reference tools so it can perform actions.
Today's guest is Adam Anzoni, co-founder of SimpleStack, a brand new startup that just officially launched at an announcement at Google Cloud Next. Before founding SimpleStack, Adam was a CTO at Funwell, where he led technical strategy and product development. Before that, he was a technical infra lead at blockchain.com, a technical advisor for toys for hospitalized children, and Salesforce consultant at Norflash. He's recently been writing blogs like his recent one titled Agents for Non-Techies, spoke at Google Cloud Next on the topic of AI, and was on a podcast with Omni AI about his YC-backed document intelligence tool, which we will discuss. We'll also talk about his journey, which he's building now, and how he sees the future of AI infrastructure unfolding. Adam, welcome. It's great to have you on.
So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Awesome. Me as well. So let's start off with a little bit of an intro. Tell me a bit about yourself and how you got into this field.
Yeah. So my name's Adam Anzoni. I've been working in the tech space for the last 10 years. And really throughout my tech career working at fast growth startups, I saw the common theme of companies needing to stay focused on their product, but having external tasks and more admin managerial tasks come up, like managing your tech stack. So, yeah, I'm really excited to talk more about SimpleStack and what we're working on there to help solve that problem.
Yeah, same. Excited to learn all about it. So, first, tell me about this launch. I mean, we'll go into more about what SimpleStack is, but what was it like at Google Cloud Next? Like, what was the response like? I actually was supposed to speak at Google Cloud Next in 2020, but I had to do it online. So, I'm a little bit jealous about that. You got this speaking opportunity. It seems super
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, the Google team does a great job with that conference. I think there was about 30,000 people who were attending, and yeah, the honor to announce our beta launch with Google and our partner Box. And yeah, the reception was really great. I think SimpleStack really struck a chord with many tech founders who feel like there's many tools on the high end like Okta and Rippling to manage authentication and user provisioning and offboarding, but there was really no tools that were focusing more on fast growth tech startups, which really are the ones that need it the most. And excited to talk more about that. But yeah, it was a really great way to announce and the reception was great.
Nice. And before, founding this new startup, SimpleStack, you've had a couple of different positions as CTO. What do you think, especially recently, that are the most recent learnings that you're going to take with you to SimpleStack?
Yeah, I would say number one, staying curious, especially with how fast technology is changing, always being aware of new technologies that are coming out, because that can be a real differentiator versus other companies. I would say also focusing on culture and team is really, really important, and having a culture of moving fast and shipping things out as quickly as possible and removing all distractions that takes away from you building your product.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was recently in a roundtable and full of people at KubeCon who were, deep in the AI infrastructure space. One of the top things that almost everyone in every table listed that they were worried about or was a struggle is basically this FOMO or an inability to kind of keep up or keep their finger on the pulse about everything that's coming in AI. And you mentioned that as kind of know everything, all the tools that are coming up. How do you make sure that you're able to do that? Because I know a lot of people struggle with it.
That's a great question because there is a abundance of information, and having sources like Hacker News that tends to be really good sources of what the most impactful things are, as well as being tapped into founders communities, I think is a great way to hear what other tech companies are using that are solving their problems and seeing what really works.
Yeah, exactly. I like that you mentioned being in communities. I think actually that's probably like one of the best ways, besides obviously like reading online, although, as you mentioned, it can get like information overload.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be hard to know what's real and what's not real. I think, speaking to founders in person and really asking them questions is the best way to find out what's really solving problems.
Yeah, I totally agree. So you're going from CTO to co-founder. How has your mindset changed or your approach changed for this new role?
I mean, as a CTO, my role really changed from early on in the company to where I left Funwell at around 120 employees. Going from a 0 to 1 kind of tech stack to finding product market fit and then also scaling is, I think the role really changes from move fast and break things to really making sure that all the systems are stable and consistently working as intended. But it really, I think, as a CTO role, you are responsible for the entire tech stack and all the updates to the tech stack. So as the tech stack grows and matures, that role really changes.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's good that you saw the growth and you can see those different patterns. So now you can do it again, but with more responsibility, even. So let's dive into SimpleStack. Tell me more about what it is. What problem does it solve?
Yeah, so SimpleStack is the easiest way for fast growing startups to manage their tech stack and really came from Funwell, where we onboarded 100 new employees last year. And that really took a lot of time and energy from my team, where for each onboarding, we needed to set up user accounts in about 20 different SaaS tools. And we would have to say, oh, this is a new sales rep that's being onboarded. These are the different systems and permissions that we need to set up. And we need to make sure that authentication was flowing properly from all of their systems, especially being in the financial space. Authentication and single sign on is really important. And as well, like, there is many times where we had new employees being onboarded and there was an issue with either access or system permissions. And we evaluated many tools like Fripling and Okta, and we felt like many of those tools are very focused on enterprise, whether it's minimum pricing spends or needing professional services to implement. That didn't really feel like it fit our need. And we really felt like it would have been best if we had set up all these roles and permissions and authentication in one system really from the beginning so that we're not kind of replacing all of our roles and permissions across all these systems when we're 100 employees, because at that point it's a much greater lift. So creating this simple stack where all of our roles, permissions, and authentication lives in one platform, so that when we're onboarding a new employee, it really just is as easy as saying, this is the employee, this is the role, and this is the level of access that they need.
Oh, nice. Okay. So, what made you, or what was the process like to when you said, okay, I need to like start this company or this is what I want to do? How did that process come about?
Yeah. I think it was one of those things that once I saw it, it was kind of something that I couldn't unsee. I really started to see all the time that my team was wasting on setting up user accounts and onboarding and not focusing on our core product, um, which at the end of the day, our core product didn't improve in any way when we were doing all these manual admin tasks. So once I saw that problem, I couldn't unsee it and became somewhat obsessed with it and felt very strongly that this was a problem that needed to be solved. And it didn't seem like anyone else was doing it, so I decided that should be me.
Yeah. So, you mentioned there are other available tools that maybe didn't have the same features, but do you have any competitors in this space?
Yeah. Yeah, there are many competitors on the high end. A few Jump Cloud, Better Cloud, Rippling are to name a few, but they all require minimum spends, usually at least $10,000 a year, at least, and most of them are difficult to configure, to set up. They usually require their implementation services uh, to do an initial configuration, which can take up to 3 months. And for fast growing tech startups, that doesn't really, um, I think, fit with the needs of most of these companies, especially ones that are bootstrapped and may not want to spend that amount on user permissions.
Yeah, I see what you mean now by they're built for enterprise companies because they have this very large minimal spend. I see. It seems like they're a bit clunkier, maybe like, I don't want to say outdated, but not really fast.
Enterprise, I
Yeah,
would say more
exactly.
focus on the enterprise, and it made sense that they decided to go up market. I mean,
Yeah.
that they wanted to focus on companies that have 1,000 plus seats, which I think makes sense for them.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So in the past, I can relate in that when I've joined companies, they've have been like, "Oh, we forgot to add this," or do you need this GitHub permission or that?" And I'm assuming this is what that solves. Like, "Hey, I'm onboarding. I need GitHub, email or whatever."
Yeah, not just having the initial setup, but then also being able to request system access later on. And maybe you start with your initial applications, but maybe you need access to Notion in a couple months. You can request access from your manager or whoever would be the person who would approve that access.
Nice. And so, who exactly is this built for then? I mean, I'm guessing that it's built for like all cross engineering or sales teams and anything, but instead of like my manager doing it, or is it mainly like an admin will do it now, or does that really matter?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, from a lot of the initial interviews that I did with founders of fast growing tech startups, it's either, depending on the stage of the company, it's either the founder, someone on the tech team, or an executive assistant who is doing all this configuration and provisioning. And especially if it's the CTO or founder, I mean, founders have so many other things that are on their plate. I feel like, being able to take away those tasks and even if it's an executive assistant who's doing it, there are many times where authentication wasn't set up properly or user provisioning didn't happen properly. And the founder wanted to have visibility over what that executive assistant was doing from a account provisioning standpoint. I'll give you a story. So there was one tech founder that I was talking about of a um, fast growing Airbnb alternative. And she had mentioned that she had gone into Jira and found that they had 100 licenses that were turned on, and they didn't even have 100 employees. And really, that was from uh, contractors and employees that had been offboarded keeping their Jira licenses on and no one going back in and removing them from Jira, which from an access standpoint was, something that was concerning. And then as well, spending all that money on licenses that weren't being used was something that, is something that SimpleStack is looking to solve.
Yeah, and I'm sure so many people have that problem across like so many different things. I'm sure that's like a super common issue that people are having. So yeah, that would be great. This doesn't seem like it would be such an easy platform to build. I mean, you have a lot of integration. Also, you are you need to like have good security. You have the ability to create accounts. What would you say has been the toughest component of this?
Yeah, great question. I would say the toughest component is that there's many protocols like SAML for authentication and SCIM for user provisioning that are only available to enterprise licenses. It's one of what many people call SaaS bloat, where SaaS tools only give you access to these automation and authentication tools if you're paying for the highest tier license, which you normally cannot even find out what the price is online. You have to contact their sales team and get a quote. There, again, is usually a minimum spend that really doesn't make sense for founders. But founders, especially ones that are selling to larger companies or medium-sized companies and need to do things like get a SOC 2 audit, they need the highest level of authentication as they're selling and have their customers have the expectations from a security and privacy standpoint. So really bringing these tools that are available to larger companies to small, fast-growing startups.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So, as you're designing this product, like what are some of the main principles or design decisions that you are using to guide your team?
Yeah, great question. I would say first starting off, getting feedback from the customers has been really impactful for the roadmap and the vision of the product. At the end of the day, we're trying to help founders build quicker and learning more about how we can build a product so that it can remove some of these authentication issues and provisioning issues so that the founders can focus more on building their product. So the early feedback has been great, and we're really adopting the feedback that helps other founders build faster and not have to focus on these manual admin tasks.
Awesome. Well, that sounds exciting. So, with that, how are you thinking about, building a team and shaping company culture at your new role? I know you kind of talked about these are the important things that are different from, CTO and co-founder, like what you're looking forward to. But what are you specifically really thinking about as you're starting to build your team and company?
I mean, I really focus on people who are curious about learning more, especially in the problem space of authentication and different and managing different SaaS tools. I think that a curiosity in that space is really important, but then also a passion and a drive to build interesting things, especially related to that space that solves real world problems. I think many times teams can get distracted by different kind of areas or technologies that might be new, but always bring it back to what is the core problem that we're solving. And at the end of the day, the core problem that we're solving is removing the authentication and user provisioning bottlenecks that many founders face so that they can focus on their product.
Have you started hiring yet or in the process?
Yeah, we have an early team. So I have a co-founder and then one other engineer who's helping us out with the initial beta. But we will be hiring soon. The plan is to participate in an accelerator, especially as that's a place where there are many fast-growing tech startups. So it seemed like it would be a really good fit for SimpleStack, not just from a learning perspective and a great place to build out product, but also a great place to get real world feedback from fast growing tech startups.
Awesome. Yeah, that will be a really fun time. And it must be super fun now because you're super lean. That's always fun right before you start
Yeah,
to hire people.
the 0 to 1 phase is both terrifying, but also really fun in the sense that, you and your and in my case, my co-founder really have to, figure everything out. But it's an opportunity to move really fast and to pivot based off feedback because we don't have as much infrastructure as we will once we scale. It's really an opportunity to build everything from the ground up.
Yeah.
And I think it's most important to listen on what's adding value to the customer and where are there other areas where are there common themes across multiple founders of how SimpleStack can add value and how can we build that into the product.
Yeah. So Also, you mentioned you have a co-founder. How did you meet your co-founder, and what were you looking for in a co-founder?
Yeah, great question. I met my co-founder at um, a tech event in New York City. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and um, Boris, who's my co-founder, was someone who's actually been thinking about this problem since 2021, where he actually wrote a blog post about user provisioning authentication for where he saw the landscape at that moment, and really deep dived into the architecture that he would use in that moment. So, thought that that would be a really good fit where someone's already been thinking about the problem, had previous startup experience, had an exit as well. So really brought a lot of experience to the table, not just from the authentication standpoint, but also from the startup space in general. So that's been really beneficial. And as any founder knows, I think the co-founding dating process is really important, and to get to know the other person, as you'll be spending a lot of time with that person, and we'll be in some pretty stressful situations throughout the founding of a company phase, and especially as unexpected challenges come up, it's really important to get a good understanding of who you're founding the company with.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a good match, though, and it goes back to what you said about community staying in the know, and that kinda stuck with me too because, um, it just highlights how going to these events in person and, like, meeting people, is so key and can lead to things that you wouldn't even expect. Like, I personally have also went to random tech events that I didn't know anyone at, and I ended up meeting people who I know today that's led me down many different paths. So I think that this just highlights that and made me think a bit about how important it is to, and keep putting yourself out there, like, being social in the tech scene and just getting to know people and how much it can pay off or, like, lead to things that you wouldn't even think of when you were on the way to the event.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we're living in the
Yeah.
large cities, to meet and be in these communities of top tier tech, either founders or operators or even VCs. I think there's been so many times where I've met someone who has not just works in tech, but has similar interests to me as well, and also talks about how they're tackling a problem that I then go and use the same approach or a similar approach on a problem that I'm looking at. So, I think being connected to a community is extremely beneficial and something that can add a lot of value. And usually, if you are out there and maybe you haven't founded a company, but uh, interested in founding a company, I would say that hanging around with other founders is the best way to kind of catch the bug, more or less, and to to learn more about what caused founders to go off on the journey of founding their own company and finding a co-founder and finding product market fit. I think those stories can be really inspiring, and being around those type of people tends to rub off on you.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's great advice. And as you mentioned at these events, it's a lot of founder and VCs. And so the same question I just asked you about how to choose a founder, I'm wondering the same thing. How are you looking at choosing who invests in you or who to partner with when it comes to investments?
Yeah, great question. And we are currently bootstrapped, so not something that we haven't taken investment yet, especially because we will probably be doing an accelerator, which tends to lead with an initial investment. But from my experience in the past, like one thing that I've seen really helpful for VCs is having a partner that can really benefit your company and complement the company. So for example, for SimpleStack, the audience that we're solving a problem for is early stage tech founders, especially ones that are selling B2B SaaS to medium to large size enterprises, which we're really seeing a lot of momentum in that space. I think, especially with new AI tools, it's becoming easier and easier to build tools that solve problems for enterprise customers. But having strategic VCs that can help us with things like introductions to other founders, and has experience in the SaaS and authentication space, and can give us advice on where our product roadmap is, what they're hearing from other founders, and introduce us to whether it's other SaaS tools that we can integrate into SimpleStack or other founders that could give us feedback and potentially be future customers.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for you, it seems like what's important is one of the things that's important is relevant experience in the space, but also the ability to connect and network you with those people that or those companies that you really need to integrate with would be super helpful.
Yeah. And I think it can be very positive sum where typically what we've seen from founders is after they raise a seed or a series A, they tend to have to hire a number of new employees or contractors. And that's when SimpleStack can really shine, where if you have your permissions, roles, and authentications configured properly in SimpleStack, when you go to onboard all those new employees or contractors, you'll be able to seamlessly onboard them as opposed to needing to go in and set up each tool and system individually.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I've asked you, what kind of teammate, what do you look for in teammates? I've asked you what you look for in a co-founder and VC. Now I'm going to turn the question to you. What kind of leader do you aspire to be?
Yeah. I think, someone who is constantly learning new things, trying to better themselves both in the office and outside the office, and just building cool things. Whether it's building at work, building relationships with our partners, building content like we're doing right now. And I know we're going to talk more about the content that I've recently released as well. And I think giving back to the community, giving back to these tech communities that I've gained a lot, giving back to partners through speaking engagements and talking about how we use their product and how it adds value for us and for customers of SimpleStack. I think everything that you give tends to be returned manyfold. So I think trying to create a positive sum environment where simple stack is trying to help founders, and I think that's what we want to focus on.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. So you've been sharing recently, different updates and insights publicly. Can you talk a bit about why doing this is important to you?
Yeah, I think communicating really some areas where I get a lot of questions on. I think one of them in particular is AI. And it's a very, like you mentioned before, it's a fast moving space and there's a lot of noise, but all the content, like the recent blog posts I posted, Agents for Non Techies, um, all the content that I'm producing has the intention of educating people who might not be as up to date with all the AI space. I mean, it's so hard to even keep up with all the recent news. But in my most recent blog post, not only do I have an explanation that really is tailored to anyone and understanding what are the real world use cases of agents today, and it even walks through a 3-minute tutorial of how you can build your first agent. And one thing I also talk about in that blog post is I think the real change in AI over the last 6 months has been for the last couple years now, we've had these chatbots or things like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini that we can ask questions, and the chatbot can understand us and give us a response based off the information that they've trained on, which is typically the entire internet. So they're really good at answering questions. But the change now is that not only can it answer questions, but now with things like MCP, which is a standardized protocol that Anthropic put out, developers can build tools that these chatbots can reference. So it goes from not just having information and knowing how to give you the answer that you want, but also it goes to being able to reference tools so it can perform actions. So one example, and the example in my blog post is just a simple one where I want to go to a certain website. The agent can understand, oh, this person is trying to go to this subreddit and can open the browser for you and go to that website for you. And I think that's just you know, I don't know how much value that would add, but where this goes is being able to schedule a calendar event on your behalf, see the next availability that you have on your calendar, and then schedule it, and then maybe create a lead in Salesforce or maybe send a Slack message and not just referencing a single tool, but it can reference multiple tools in a chain so that you can perform or the agent can perform tasks on your behalf. And I think that there's many initial issues that these agents have run into, which is I think one of the reasons why enterprises and larger businesses have been slow to adopt. And one of them that I've been focused a lot on lately is the authentication issue. So
Mm,
these agents are referencing these tools that connect to external systems like Slack or Salesforce or Google Calendar. Today, many of these MCP servers require you to put in an authentication key. And if I mean, I don't know how many people know how to get their Slack or Salesforce authenticate or API keys, but if you think of typical software today, you usually have an OAuth process where you are given either the option to sign in with a password or with a single sign-on provider
yeah.
like Google or Okta or GitHub, etc. So bringing some of these authentication methods that we built at SimpleStack and that many companies like Auth0 or WorkOS or Stitch have built. I think yeah, there's many tools to leverage, and I think this authentication piece is going to be really important for more users to be able to adopt these agents.
Nice. Yeah, agents are super powerful. So, are you going to use agents or AI because I haven't asked you this in SimpleStack?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. The initial onboarding process will be guided through an agent. So connecting your existing systems, whether it's Notion, Slack, HubSpot, Google Workspaces, et cetera, walking through that initial setup process is going to be guided through an agent as well as onboarding tasks in management. Currently, there's a UI, but in the future, there will also be an agent that you can talk to just say, I need to onboard this individual. This is the role that they're onboarding. One other common thing that we've heard from founders is that with contractors in particular, having a set start and end date so that their login access expires exactly when their contract expires. So there's no situation where looking back at a system and realizing, oh wait, I forgot to deprovision this user or this contractor who was only here for a couple months in our like GitHub repositories or in Slack or et cetera, so that they don't have access to your information and your systems, and also so that you're not paying for licenses that aren't being used.
Yeah, that I'm sure that would be super helpful and something that's really needed. Yeah, I think agents are super useful. I think you also talked about it in your Google Cloud Next talk a little, right? Or I know I looked at your slides briefly. I know it was about like you seem to have partnered with Box and Google like GCP and you're using AI agents and then the end you talked a little bit about simple stacks. Can you talk a little bit about that as well, what that was about?
Yeah, Google Cloud Next, I talked a lot about the work that at Funwell we did to automate the onboarding and underwriting process. Like most financial companies, during the onboarding process, we required certain financial documents to be uploaded. And in the past, that required someone to manually open the documents, what the document was, extract information from that document to check to make sure that we had the correct documents to start the underwriting process.
I would want
And
that to be my job.
yeah, exactly. That was a real bottleneck for us to grow. I mean, the more companies that we were onboarding required us to have more more employees who are spending their time doing manual document review and extracting information from these really large documents like business bank statements. So we use Box AI to programmatically extract the information from these documents so that someone didn't have to manually open the document to understand what the document was and to validate that they actually uploaded the financial documents that we needed. There was many times where people onboarding would upload even things like their pictures of their cat as opposed to actual financial documents. So
Oops.
yeah, exactly. Validating that the document is, as much as we want to see pictures of people's cats, what we really need is financial documents, so that we can understand the financial health of the business. Also, closing that feedback loop so that when customers uploaded the incorrect documents, that we could tell them immediately as opposed to after someone manually reviewed it. So the onboarding process was the first process that we started extracting information from documents, or what Box calls metadata extraction. But we also applied it to many different parts of the underwriting process and also connected it to other systems like Salesforce and like our custom inbuilt apps. And one thing that Box really provided us was not just a centralized repository of our content that was compliant, and had certifications like FinRamp, and was things like WORM compliant, but also like allowed us to easily make connections with our business apps and our custom in-house systems that we've built.
Nice. Seems like a good lead up to SimpleStack as well. I like giving these talks, like the kind of talk you gave at Google Cloud Next. I think it's really great for what we've been talking about, like building community, learning more from people. You meet people in the same space, you get better ideas, but also probably for you, especially the blog, since your platform does deal a lot and your product does deal a lot with, authentication, authorizations, these more sensitive things that people might be worried about, like what is going on with AI? Am I putting all my stuff in AI? You probably feel that getting this information out and educating people, writing these posts, having this transparency about, how things work will also help the users that are wanting to use your product as well.
And I think there's so much confusion around these topics that
Yeah.
educating, not just educating, but also showing what you can do today is the best way for, I think, the fears that are maybe exaggerated to be dispelled and to focus on the most important issues like authentication and agents having access to your data, and when they have access to their data. To your data, I think is really important and is going to be crucial not just for more users to adopt these agents and see value to it, but especially larger companies for them to be able to be comfortable using these tools in production. They're gonna need to kind of have this knowledge and information. Yeah, but Alexa, I know that you also recently spoke at a conference. Do you mind also talking about a little bit about what you spoke about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also in AI infrastructure, and I talk about building platforms. Or we have a open source project, Kserve, that my manager co-founded that we're super involved in. Another one like Envoy AI Gateway that just helps you easily run, on-prem or different LM providers with a very simple and fixed API. Yeah, so making it a lot easier to do that. But I also gave a demo using an agent, and I think it's true that you say people are very confused, and I think the wording is confusing as well. Also, I like that you have demos in your blog, and I think that when I read your blog, I liked it and the style of it because it reminds me of how I write when I'm learning something and or when I learn something and I want to publish about it. It's like a very practical style that I resonate with and I like because I feel like it's the best way to learn or also to tell a story. So I like that you have some very practical ways and some demos on that. But I think again, the word agent feels kind of scary. All it is just some code that's telling you where to go run some other code. It's like, oh, just
Exactly.
go. Like I used a weather, it's like very common weather agent, and the LLM just doesn't have access to up to date data, so it just goes to the agent, which is basically like a
Like
whatever.
another service or tool. Yeah.
Yeah, basically just goes to a service says, go to this database or query, go to a service that'll query a database or get like real time information about the weather today, and then return that answer back to me, and then go feed it to the LLM just so the LLM can put it in words. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like people get
Yeah.
really confused about, or like take an action, like, or, some service that can actually make the calendar
Yeah.
appointment.
I mean, I really think that at this point, we're really just recreating tools that we've had for more traditional technology platforms like SDKs, but for agents. So, like what I see getting built out right now is standards like MCP that allows developers to build marketplaces of tools that you can connect to your agent. And I think that the next wave of what's going to get built out in terms of if you think through what do technology tools have that agents and LLM platforms don't have today, definitely, uh, I think personalizing these agents so that it's bringing in information like weather information from external services or your own personal information to personalize the chatbot and to give information and answers that are relevant based off the data that exists in these external services like Gmail, like Google Calendar, like Slack and Salesforce, so that it can not only give you more relevant answers, but also perform actions and tasks on your behalf.
Yeah, I think when we have better integration, it'll be such a game changer. It's like things that you're working on, or like that a lot of people working, like being able to use an LLM is great, but being able to actually integrate it into the things you use and not have to copy paste all the time, like back and forth between whatever you're doing. And I think it'll really increase certain areas of productivity too.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if for the audience out there, if you're interested in keeping up with the space, I am going to be releasing a series of blog posts. So this first one, Agents for Non-Techies, was the kind of the ground truth and kind of the initial knowledge that you need to know of what is an agent, what can they do, and what you can do today. But I'm going to be building on top of that. So talking about some of these more very important, but a little bit more complex topics like personalizing your agent, like authentication, like thinking through privacy. And when you're giving data to an AI platform, what are some of the considerations that you should have, and how does it work on the back end so that you can be aware what your what's happening when you give an agent your data, which is I think most of the content that I've seen has been very focused on a technical audience. But I think it's really important to provide content for everyone else. So that's a a public resource that I'm trying to build and give back to people who are curious.
I agree with you, and I think that targeting that audience is definitely something that's needed and not as often as addressed as a target audience of technical people for sure.
And I think there's a possibility that agents, I think later this year, with how fast the technology has been developing, where, I don't know if you remember using the early versions of ChatGPT, like 3 and 4, but when you compare that to the the chat models that we have today, it's really clear how fast this technology is moving, not just from a underlying LLM technology, but also these corresponding technologies like MCP, like also Google announced that Google Cloud Next agent to agent, which is a protocol so that agents can speak to each other. If your weather agent wants to give information to maybe your calendar agent because maybe you're going to a Yankees game, for example. But, obviously the weather is very important because if it's raining, they're going to cancel the game. So having agents being able to talk to each other um, is going to be something that in the near future is going to be a reality in a lot of these products. But I think it's really important to have a base level information of how these systems work.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, exciting. So, what is on the roadmap for SimpleStack in the, next 6 to 12 months? Like, what do you see in a year from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think building out more of these agent experiences so that authentication and user provisioning can be handled through natural language, and not just having a UI where users or founders and people who are working on technology teams for these fast-growing startups can have a single place where they can see all the users, all the systems that those users are using, and making sure that they're logging into systems, using the systems they have access to, et cetera. But also being able to chat with an agent to perform some of these more admin tasks that have always been associated with managing a tech stack. So that could be onboarding users, offboarding users, but also could be adding a new tool because as these companies grow, they either are adding new tools to be able to do things they haven't done in the past, like, for example, doing email marketing, having new design tools or project management tools, so that as their company grows and scales, they're able to have systems that solve their problems. So being able to um, help founders decide, is Figma or Canva the right solution for my company? Or um, is Salesforce or HubSpot the right fit for my company based off all these other variables? Walking founders through that and also showing what other founders have found successful. So, what are other fintech startups using for document intelligence or for their content repository? Helping founders with those type of questions so that they can get back to building their products.
Awesome. Well, it seems like you have a lot to do. That's all the questions I have. I'd like to ask a final question. What's, one piece of advice that you would give to our users, or do you have any last words to say?
Yeah, I would say, I think it's a really exciting time. So connect with in-person communities or online communities and be curious about some of the new things that are coming out. I think it's almost like you said before, Alexa, it's almost like there's too much information and too many things being released. So focusing on a certain area and really deep diving, I think is important. And then trying to build something out. Building cool things and building things that aren't just cool, but also solve problems either that you have or that people that have. I really like the problems that I have. That's kind of like what SimpleStack um, is a manifestation of a problem that I saw firsthand and experienced firsthand. So it was really top of mind and,
Yeah.
dare I say, slightly personal. But I think solving problems and using new technology tools and really kicking the tires to see what is real and what can you use today to solve real world problems. I think experimenting is not just, you know, great for when you are able to solve the problem, but also when you find the shortcomings of the current technology, so you can say, well, have that experience of, oh, this AI technology or authentication technology, whatever the technology might be, is not ready to solve this problem, but maybe it's going to be ready in 3 to 4 months. I think experimentation and trying to build things out that solve problems is extremely beneficial, and can only benefit people.
Yeah, well, that's great advice. Thank you so much for coming on. And I have enjoyed witnessing your journey, and I'm excited for what's coming next.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexa, for having me, and really appreciate everyone who's been listening. Yeah, check out some of my most recent content if you're interested in authentication, agents, and learning what's being deployed today to solve real world problems.
Great. Thank you for listening to this episode of Alexa's Input. Make sure to subscribe so you know when the next episode comes out. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at Alexa's Input. Finally, any donations are welcome. You can go click the link in the description, go to the anchor page, and I do take donations because I edit and record these podcasts on my own. So those are very much appreciated. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.